Hi, welcome to another math school video. This is about changing the subject, which is part 2 of one we did not that long ago, but this time it's with powers, all right, or indices, depends on what you want to call them these days, all right. So changing the subject with powers. Well, the inverse of a power is a root, all right. So you'll know it probably is more like square root, but of course it could be cube root or the fourth root or fifth root, depending on the number that it is up there, all right. But ultimately, the inverse of a power is a root. All right, so let's have a look. So if I want to make y the subject, then x equals y squared. Well, the inverse of a power is a root. In this case, because the number is 2, it's the square root. So if I'm going to do the inverse of this lot over here, then I need to square root this over here. All right, so square root sign and the square root of x. All right, there's no need for a little 2 at this point, because that tends to be the symbol quite accepted to have a square root. All right, so there's no number kind of needed but the square root of x. And then of course now y is on its own, so that's it, job done. Easy as pie, that one. What about the cube roots? Well, like I kind of mentioned, it's the same process. If I'm going to basically make y the subject, and because it's currently cubed to the power 3, then I've got to do the inverse over here, so it would be the cube root over here. This time this little 3 is needed, all right, to show that it's the third or cube root, and that will be the cube root of this time x. Okay, and that's your job done. So relatively straightforward. You just got to keep your eye on the number. If it's square root, you don't need a number kind of here. If it's a cube root, that's 3, and of course if it's anything bigger, then I'd have to use that number. All right. Right, the second part of that is combining it with maybe something else which is going on. So there's quite a few things now starting to take place, which is why this is part 2. Please look at part 1 in relation to this. There's another video on this one, which kind of is the first step of this. But we've got to look at what happens to v. V is the bit that we're trying to make the subject, and we're trying to see what's happened. All right, so we've got v squared, times it by 5, and then take away 4. All right. I just want to highlight why I did v squared before I times it by 5, and that comes down to BIDMAS. All right. So it's been a while since you've looked at BIDMAS. You might want to look at another video on BIDMAS, or BODMAS as it used to be called, which is the order of operations, if you remember. So brackets, indices, divide, multiply, add, subtract, the order you do things. All right. So indices comes pretty high up on the pecking order there. It comes second. And there is no brackets, so indices comes first, which is why I said it's v squared. Then multiply, then times it by 5, and then subtract the 4. All right, so that's the order we do things. So if I'm going to do the inverse of all those things, I have to consider the order I did them in the first place. So I'll say it one more time so you're clear. I squared it, then times it by 5, then take away 4. All right, so if I'm going to go backwards, I'm going to add the 4, I'm going to divide by the 5, and I am then going to square root. All right, and that's what I'm going to do to this r over here. So we're going to do it in stages. Okay, so let's do it. So 4 on its own needs to move first, which I've mentioned. So we're going to add the 4. All right, so that's first step. So r plus 4 equals 5v squared. So that's the bit I've moved first of all. All right, move it over here. So I've added. So that's inverse. Okay, and just to be kind of clear, is that these steps that I am talking about here, now some of it I will talk to you through, and some of it I write down. Your job really in an exam is to make sure you write down those steps. All right, there'll be marks awarded for the process of you trying to get there. All right, so it's really important you practice those processes and make sure you're writing down every part as you go. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So we added the 4, and then we need to divide by 5. All right, and like we did in part 1 of the change of the subjects, all of this needs to be divided by 5. So when I divide it by 5, big long line, and to show that it's all divided by 5. All right, so and that would leave us with a v squared. All right, so now this looks an awful lot like what we had on the left hand side. So we need to square root, but of course we need to square root all this. All right, not just the top, not just the bottom, the whole lot. So we're going to need a big square root sign, which goes all the way over the top. All of it equals v. All right, and you need to be bold and brave about that. Okay, that's what you need to do. It's not any shortcut to doing it. It's just understanding that when I divided by 5, it was all of it, and when I square rooted it, it was all of it. So therefore, it needs to look like that. All right. If it doesn't look like that, and you've left it at the top or you've left it at the bottom, then of course you're going to get it wrong. All right. That is your answer. That is your solution, and that is how it's done. Okay. Thanks for listening.